Welcome back to A Year of Final Fantasy, and we are in the month of Ramu. Today we're going to be looking at the next game, or should I say pair of games, in the Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles series known as Echoes of Time. Now, the game is a sequel to Ring of Fates, but it is still a prequel to the original Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles game for the GameCube. So there's not a ton to say about this game, but there is one huge aspect that we have to talk about. The most obvious new concept for this game is that it released on both the Wii and the DS at the same time. For my research, it shows that this game boasts a new engine, quote unquote, that allows the DS and Wii users to play together, and it's known as the Pollux engine. I think the wording may be a little bit strange, since traditionally we talk about a game engine being essentially what kind of sorts and streams the code into the particular portions of the PC and outputs the music and the visuals and everything, and it accepts inputs. Now, what this Pollux engine does, it seems to be more like a translator or a wrapper, where it'll interpret the Wii or DS code and translate it during gameplay to allow them to play with one another. This was a huge thing at the time. The reason I make this distinction though is that Echoes of Time seems to be built on the same engine as Ring of Fates, the traditional engine that we think of. Echoes of Time has actually a quick development cycle, releasing only maybe a little bit more than a year after Ring of Fates in 2009. When we compare this to, say, Crystal Chronicles for the GameCube and Ring of Fates, that had a 4-year gap where essentially they had to make an entirely new engine for the DS. So my thought here is that this Pollux engine, while it sounds new and advanced, just a sheer fact of how quickly this game had a turnaround from Ring of Fates, how similarly it operates as Ring of Fates, I'm thinking that the Pollux engine is really, like I said, just a translator for the Wii and the DS, and it's not really an entire new game engine in and of itself. Now, I could be completely wrong, and if I am, please correct me in the comments below. So, okay, all the technical aspects aside, Echoes of Time and Ring of Fates, like I said, are incredibly similar, and this is what you would expect out of a traditional sequel to a game. All the familiar gameplay and tropes are still present, but they just have enhanced new gameplay elements. In this case also, you can swim in the game and even do a little bit of combat while swimming, so that's one of the biggest new changes that they've added. Combat in general is the same as it was in Ring of Fates, with small little additions like different weapon abilities and the variety of weapons that everyone can use. Armor and weapons also gain strength as you use them, something I really enjoy in games, because weapons don't immediately become just completely obsolete. I like having a singular weapon, and it kind of ties you more to the character and who they are, instead of just throwing the weapons away and being like, oh look, a new shiny weapon. There's also a system to add jewels to various weapons to give them things like more damage or elemental attacks, and if you've played any other action RPGs, let's say like, I don't know, Diablo for instance, this will be immediately familiar. The magic is also slightly different here. Magic has started to lean more towards the traditional Final Fantasy casting system, and to clarify, what I mean is that the game is still based on the action magic targeting aspect, but how magic is cast is definitely different. Instead of using Magicite, we're using traditional MP that you would expect from the main Final Fantasy games. For magic, the only other thing that I have to add is that there's a snapping lock-on feature to the targeting ring, so you don't waste your valuable MP. Now, you can argue that this may be a more casualized version of the game, and that's fine, but that is something to note here. The single player and multiplayer play virtually similar to each other in both the DS and Wii iteration, because they, again, are basically the same game. What this means also is that it ditches the single player aspect that Ring of Fates had with the characters that are tied into the worlds with create your own hero character that the original game introduced. Now, there are pros and cons to each. I'm not going to go into it because that's not what this video is for, but what I will say with the story is that, I don't go into stories on these Year of Final Fantasy videos because I think the story is something to be experienced, and I don't want to ruin that for anyone. The story is, though, very well done, exactly what you would expect from these Crystal Chronicle games. There's nothing crazy here or anything, but the fact is that you are playing with your own character, so you are kind of a faceless hero. You're gonna find this a little bit lacking, but again, it's just up to personal preference. And just to reiterate, all the same races and fundamental games are still present here, and they're as pleasant as ever. If you have played a Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles game, you pretty much know what to expect. So I think to wrap up, the big thing here is to take away that the Wii and the DS can play with one another, and that is something they heavily focused on here, so you can kind of enter this franchise either from a console perspective or a handheld perspective, and you can play together, which is really what the Crystal Chronicles series does. It is all about Final Fantasy being multiplayer, and I love it. I love this novelty of playing with a handheld and console gamer. And there have only been a few games to experiment with this, and I've played most of them. Games like Monster Hunter 3 for the Wii U and the 3DS, that kind of works in a similar aspect here if you've played that. This is the major draw of the series, and Echoes of Time really focuses on it and succeeds with flying colors. With all that being said, next time during the month of Ramu, we will look at the latest major release in the Crystal Chronicles series known as Crystal Bearers. Now, there have been a few more releases that were kind of minor that we will go over, but this is going to be the last major installment in the Crystal Chronicles series. So until next time, Crystal Warriors, keep on gaming. And I have said Crystal way too much, and it's basically lost all meaning.